Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a US election special, giving you a bit of an update, a bit of news, a bit of conversation, discussion about different aspects of what has been going on. We're going to start with the subject of the economy, because the economy is routinely one of the most important components of what drives people to vote one way or the other. And traditionally, the Republicans have had the upper hand with regard to people's perceptions of how they are good at running the economy and the Democrats aren't so good, although the reality is that the data suggests otherwise, but we won't go into the long weeds of that. Now, that opinion between the opinion of the electorate that the Republicans, qua Trump, have an advantage over the Democrats, qua Harris, has been shrinking, right? And so Harris has been communicating, I think, a little bit more successfully of late that the Democrats have actually got a serious economic plan. And in fact, they've got an 81-page plan on the economy, and the Republicans have nothing. So every time you hear a criticism of a particular policy point or the Harris ticket in totem with regard to the economy, you've got to remember what the alternative is, which is a couple of ideas thrown out, really half-baked understanding about how tariffs work, so on and so forth. You know, there's only one side here that's actually genuinely serious about the economy and seemingly employing people that know what they're talking about. And that is borne out by, this isn't just me saying that because I'm supportive of the Democrats, I'm supportive of Harris over Trump. It's like, literally listen to Trump talk on the economy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And we'll come to that in a little bit with some of his performances and listen to the experts, right? Either we have experts and we listen to them because they know what they're talking about in the areas we aren't necessarily experts, or we just ignore experts and we go, do you know what? I'm ill. I'm not going to go and see a doctor. I'm just going to go and eat some soil because I heard online that eating soil is good for cancer. So no, we listen to our experts because they know what they're talking about, generally speaking. So in this context, we have Bloomberg reporting that US business leaders want Harris's stability and not Trump's chaos. So there's an article here that looks at inflation is being tamed and unemployment is low, but the Republican candidate's policies could reverse those achievements. So the idea here is that the Bidenomics, although it got a bad rap, is actually done a really good job of sorting out the US economy. And I remember it takes a couple of years between policy and outcome. These things that were put in place, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, and Infrastructure Act, all these things are having a really good effect on the US economy in terms of manufacturing boom, in terms of unemployment rates at record low in certain demographics and generally low across the board. Inflation under control. Stock markets were performing at record highs consistently. Fox News are pulling their hair out with having to report that on a daily basis, new record after new record after new record. So there's no surprise at the moment that economists are coming out and saying, do you know what? It's all going very well, thank you very much. If Trump comes in and starts whacking tariffs on things left, right, and centre, this is going to cause a complete upset. This is chaotic. We do not want this. Whoever takes office in January the 20th, says Bloomberg, will do at the same time do so at a time of unprecedented technological development. The rise of artificial intelligence holds massive promise as well as serious risks for America's economy. We deserve a president who takes these concerns seriously. Is that Donald Trump? Organizations succeed when their executives create a culture of excellence. We need a leader who knows how to bring out the best in people, invest in their success, and foster candor and mutual respect among teammates. Is that Donald Trump? But there's something even more fundamental at stake this election. American business and commerce rely on the rule of law. Companies that can't thrive where an erratic, vindictive autocrat influences our courts and justice department, and they can't take Trump at his word if he's shown himself to be a serial liar whose tweets can depress markets. That is Donald Trump, and America can't afford to return him to power. That's why so many business leaders like myself are backing Vice President Harris, who led the Biden administration's AI policy, has outlined sensible economic proposals, and above all has shown she can be trusted in the nation's highest office. For all those reasons, the business case is clear. The smart money is on Harris, says Reid Hoffman. Okay, so technology investor, co-founder of LinkedIn, and part of the business leaders for Harris' campaign. So obviously that's somewhat partisan. But outside of partisan writing, economists have blasted Trump's jobs and taxes plan as dangerous. Someone better tell the public. And this is the idea that the public just don't know this. That actually, if Fox News isn't reporting this, then there's a large amount of the electorate that is just living in ignorance as to what really Trump is actually advocating for, and what the experts in whatever field it is, what they think about this. So Trump's economic policies, says The Independent, are extremely popular with voters and often what supporters cite when asked why they support the former president in his third bid for the White House. But economists beg to differ, and they're begging the public to differ too. On the surface, Trump's vague plans to lower corporate taxes, extend his 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, implement tariffs on imported goods, eliminate taxes on tips and increase domestic employment opportunities sound appealing. Though the former president has not released a comprehensive economic plan, so he just says this stuff, no detail, he has consistently said he would lower costs for Americans and restore the nation's finances back to a pre-pandemic era. He keeps promising these things without showing how he's going to do it. It's why a Wall Street Journal poll of 750 registered voters, a vast majority of respondents said they favoured Trump's pitches. Even 47% say they supported imposing a tariff of up to 20% on goods. Remember, I showed you a video of a vlogger who was interviewing David Pakman, and the vlogger was like, "Oh, this is going to be good, putting tariffs on." Basically, and David Pakman, it turns out, managed to get out this guy that he didn't understand how tariffs work and how they would basically act as a sales tax on consumers in the US. Now, if he is someone who's maybe commenting on political ideas and whatnot, doesn't have that is going to be somewhat reflective of the population at large. They just don't understand. There is this economic ignorance. So in the same Wall Street Journal poll of 39 economists, the vast majority vehemently disagreed with some of Trump's most popular policies. When it comes to eliminated taxes on tips, 87% oppose it, believing it would have little impact on lower wage workers. 85% oppose extending or making permanent Trump's 2017 tax cuts. 100% oppose imposing tariffs on imported goods. And 16 Nobel Prize-winning economists warned in an open letter that a second Trump term would have a destabilizing effect on the US's domestic economy and negatively impact its world standing. You've got to take this seriously. An analysis from the Peterson Institute for International Economics found that Trump's policies would, quote, worsen American living standards. 88 current and former executives in corporate America predicted Trump's policies, quote, risk reigniting inflation and would, quote, lower GDP growth, and endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris in an open letter. Quote, as a bundle, the policies are pretty terrible, said Dr. Josh Bivens, a chief economist and senior researcher with the Economic Policy Institute. They will raise taxes on the vast majority of households on net while cutting taxes for the very rich and maintaining the tax cuts on corporations. They will create all sorts of weird unintended effects. No big problem currently facing US working families is really addressed. If they're all undertaken, it is near guaranteed that the result would be higher interest rates and higher inflation, Bivens said. Yet despite this, in a sign of the gulf between experts and the American public, Trump still holds a lead over Harris when it comes to the economy, albeit slight. So it's shrunk, but there's still an awful lot of people who don't understand that Trump really doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. The Associated Press has come out more recently and said Trump's economic plans would worsen inflation, experts say. And this is, saying the same kind of thing as the last article. So there is an issue, I think, facing the Trump campaign when it comes to the economy. I don't think he has the first clue what he's doing. Anyway, The Hill also reported this back on October 14th. New poll, economists expect higher inflation, deficits, interest rates under Donald Trump than Kamala Harris. So the experts are saying Harris is a better choice than Trump. So if you are someone who's a big lover of Trump, as many of you are in my threads who keep accusing me of Trump derangement syndrome, you need to argue with the experts on the subject of economics, which most of you, I'm pretty sure, will not be experts. So you then have to bring receipts. This is an interesting idea of burden of proof. So if you are presenting a claim that goes against consensus opinion, the burden of proof is on you, and you actually have to present even more evidence than if it wasn't against consensus. So there, basically, I could bore you about Bayesian probability analyses, but you have to really work hard to overcome that that prior probability that actually you're not going to be right, because all of these experts who know more about this than you do conclude antithetically to you. So don't just come onto my threads and go, oh, Trump's amazing, Harris doesn't know what she's talking about, blah, blah, blah. We're talking about the economy here, stupid, and you need to bring your receipts. Okay, and this is... So if you're serious about Trump being good on the economy, just listen to how much he really doesn't have a clue. His own words here, speaking to Maria Bartiromo here on Fox News.
I never until now I said 200. I'm using that just as a figure.
But you say 200 a lot.
Oh, I'll say 100.
I'm using it as just a figure of speech. You are running for frickin' president on an agenda that should include a platform that should include a strong sense of what you're frickin' going to do with the economy. You can't say, oh, I say 200% for inflation, for tariffs. 200% tariffs is just a figure of speech. Sometimes I say 200, sometimes I say 300, sometimes I say 500. That is massively irresponsible. You've got a business community that wants to know what you are going to do so they can put things in place. And that is how carefree you are with your economic agenda.
Just as a
But
figure
you
of
say
speech.
200 a lot.
Oh, I'll say 100, 200. I'll say 500. I don't care. I never
That's your
until
thinking.
now I said 200.
I'll say 200, 100, 500. I don't care. I'll tell you who does care. The American economy. Businesses, corporations, importers. Just unbelievable. Unbelievable. So putting massive taxes across the board is not a good thing. And you can go back into history and see that it wasn't a good thing. Lots of people seem to be talking a lot about the Smoot-Hawley Act back in 1930, but it made imports unaffordable, crushed agriculture, led to bank failures, and exacerbated a little thing called the Great Depression. It was an abject disaster. Why is it even on the table, says Benjamin Albright here. And this is in response to Trump saying things like this.
And we will take in hundreds of billions of dollars in tariff to the benefit of American citizens and pay off debt, or we're going to take care of our, we owe $35 trillion. We're going to start cutting it down very quickly. We'll be able to with growth. We call it growth. And we will take...
And he was challenged on those claims by the editor-in-chief of Bloomberg at the Chicago Economic Forum, and he didn't have an answer. And we'll come on to that because that's our next big topic. Right. Okay, so this is what he keeps making claims about concerning he's going to, raise all this money through tariffs, but there are claims, as Maria Bartiromo says, Committee for Budget Responsible Budget says that your plans will actually increase the debt by 7.5 trillion. He's just talked about how he's going to cut the debt. Actually, the experts say it's going to increase it.
But how will you pay for it? The Committee for Responsible Budget says your plans will increase the debt by $7.5 trillion.
But they don't know.
The Wall Street Journal said that your plans will increase the debt and deficits more than Kamala Harris's. But
they don't know. I mean, his answers, they don't know. Obviously, it cuts off before he answers that second point. But he just, when he's presented with an opinion that is opposite to what he has claimed, or a claim that's against his claim, he just goes fake news. They don't know. They don't know what they're talking about. Now, why are they wrong? How? Show me how that is fake news. Show me your calculations as to, because they've shown the calculations, that they've calculated this, that this is their area of expertise. You have just made this random claim that you are going to reduce the deficit by making these vague assertions during a rally. That is not doing work with receipts, right? That is not producing a coherent, a cogent economic plan. I can't believe that 46, 47, 48% of people still think he's the right guy for them. Because if that's how it is, then I can just get up and promise the moon on a stick. Anyone can get up and just make vague promises of how wonderful life will be if you vote for me. Like I said to you before, I'll give you all 1 billion spondoolies. I'll fly you to the moon and back on Elon's rocket. I'll do this. Yeah, can you do that? No, I can't do that. But what do they know? They just believe whatever I tell them. We're going to reduce the national debt by putting on tariffs of 100, 200, 500%. I don't know, any 6%, 9 million percent, 1.4 bananas, a badger on a stick. What are you talking about? Start being a little bit more economically savvy and bring some receipts. Tell us how you're doing all this that you're promising. Second Trump term would be a disaster for the economy. Morgan Stanley warns of 70,000 US monthly jobs hit from Trump tariffs. Economists map out potential impact of the tariff hikes. GDP growth would see a drag for several quarters, says the bank. People that know what they're talking about. And on the other hand, Jake Bro here sharing an infographic. 51 million jobs added since 1989. 50 million of them were created under Democrats. 1 million under the Republicans. And this is kind of what I was talking about with regard to the difference between reality and perception. And of course, you can look at global economic trends and Democrats taking over after like recessions and whatnot, but then you have to ask yourself, how much were the Republicans involved in exacerbating recessions, etc., etc. So there you go. That's something to throw into the mix. Now, here's the brutal truth. MAGA, you scream America first, but your actions show it's really Trump first. You'd rather see the country burn than admit it's doing well under anyone else. You're allergic to facts, terrified of progress, and cling to a con man who sells you fear because he knows you're too blinded by your own ignorance to question it. You call yourself patriots, but real patriots don't worship one man like a god. They fight for truth, for progress for all Americans. Your whole movement is nothing but a fragile ego wrapped in a flag. Go F yourselves. Okay, so this guy's angry. But what I wanted to take from this is this idea that we see really often, and it does happen to some degree on both sides, but way more, I think, from the Republicans looking at Democrats, which is, I'd rather see the country burn than admit that it's doing well. So I'd rather it does badly than it does well, because if it does badly under the Democrats, then I can blame the Democrats. And if it does well, like the present economy is doing, then actually that gives me real cognitive dissonance, because I can't harbour both of those ideas in my head at once. I can't harbour the idea that Democrats are evil and they're rubbish at the economy and they're bad at everything and everything Democrats do is crap. And the evidence that the economy is doing really well under the Democratic leadership. So what they do, and this is what Trump does, is he says, well, it's only doing well because I was in charge before, and that's why it's doing well now. And he says that every time there's good things, but then forgets all the bad things. Oh, that didn't happen. That bad thing didn't happen because of me. But the good things happened because of me. So that's one way of dealing with it. The other way is just by not admitting it, bury your head in the sand. So this kind of goes away and you hold on to that. Like, oh, it's not great. Oh, inflation. Oh, things are really expensive. Yeah, but you're earning more than you were before. Yeah, things are really expensive. Yeah, but, average wage growth has been above inflation for 16 months in a row or whatever it is. Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting phenomenon, that. So, and then talking about, patriotism and whether the country is doing well and whether it's a good place. This is Trump's view.
Like, my legacy to be is the same as the term MAGA, make America great again. I'm going to make this country great again. It's not a great country right now. It's loaded up.
It's always a great country. It's a great country.
See, that's
it's always a great country.
Okay, but like...
That's where I disagree. It's always a great country. That's where I disagree. So in order for Make America Great Again to work, it means it has to not be great now. So the default position is that America can't be great in order for MAGA to be a coherent idea. For it to make sense, it has to be shite. So his whole platform is that America is of course shite, and we have to make it great again. So he's always doing America down. And economically speaking, that just doesn't really jive with reality. Now, the EU is preparing, so given that there's going to be a big tariff war, and he's saying he's going to put 100, 200, 5%, 500, he's even said 2,000% tariffs on goods coming in, the EU are gearing up to have a trade war. So not just China, this is the EU going, So European Union is reportedly devising a trade defense strategy in anticipation of a potential victory by Donald Trump, but in the upcoming presidential elections on November the 5th. According to Bloomberg, sources within the union indicate that if the former president regains control of the White House and follows through on his threats to impose heavy protectionist measures, the EU would not hesitate to retaliate by targeting a list of American-made products. Trade war, big problem. America will be in a bit of a bind. And just on this kind of idea of budgets and balancing budgets, we have Trump again.
Cash flow income is not going up. Middle Americans may be like, I can't afford to do this. Yes, we'd love to have it made in America, but a regular person making $55,000, you can afford this. So how do you balance and manage tariffs so the average person is not affected?
So here's a guy saying, look, tariffs are basically a sales tax on a consumer. You're going to get this phone. Yeah, it'd be nice if this phone's built in America, but phones generally aren't built in the US, right? If you're going to make that happen through tariffs, that's like 5 years down the line. Right? You can't just set up a big phone company in America. So if you're going to tax things, then suddenly it's 500% more expensive for a phone. That's 5 times more expensive. So a $1,000 phone becomes $5,000 phone, right? A $500 phone becomes $2,500, right? And then you've got issues because consumers can't get what they want, and people aren't making money on phone sales or whatever. You are going to have a negative effect on the economy. You're putting up barriers to entry. You're putting up, you are removing frictionless trade. Okay. So he's challenged him on this, and this is Trump's response.
The average person is not affected by it, please.
But before I do that,
so easy.
Let me just say, already tariffs, because to me, I think it's the most beautiful word in the dictionary. More beautiful than love, more beautiful than any word I know, tariff.
Cash flow.
Somebody who's not serious and also doesn't really know what he's talking about doesn't speak like this. Someone who's an economic expert would never say tariff is the most beautiful word in the dictionary. It's more beautiful than love. It shows you don't really value love very much, mate. If you think tariffs is more beautiful than love, then you're a bit of a douche. But also, like, that's not serious talk, mate. That is someone who's just flubbing. He's just filling in space with nonsense, because in his head, I mean, this to me sounds like he's a bit demented, but in his head, he's built tariffs up onto this pedestal that he's hanging on to this one idea. This is a central component of his whole economic plan, and it is not a good central component to have. Strategic tariffs, fine, right? This is our industry. We've got an issue with that here, and we'd like to, infant industry protectionism. So say we've got this infant industry that we want to nurture in the US, and we need to protect them so that we can generate this, and this would be good for our strategic outcomes and objectives in terms of, I don't know, military industrial or, steel making or technology or whatever. We want to protect this particular area of this industry. Then we are going to put tariffs on this, and this that comes in that would be competing with this. And that would stop people buying just those particular things there and allow this industry to be nurtured to a success that fits in with our strategic planning, right? Economic planning. That's fine. Like, I'm not anti-tariffs. But that's not what he's saying. He's repeatedly saying he's putting tariffs on everything across the board coming into the country. That is economic suicide, and it is stupid. And it is utterly insane. And then to say things like, it's the most beautiful word ever, it's more beautiful than love, just tells me he doesn't really know what he's talking about. And it's incredible, beggars belief. So Trump, when he was at the Bloomberg News Economic Club of Chicago discussion with this chap Micklethwaite, the editor-in-chief, he said some pretty bonkers things, but he also said some incorrect things. So he told a story about how he saved US jobs with a tariff threat to get that got John Deere to declare yesterday. So he was remember, he was at that not rally, but he was at a kind of sit-down table thing with all these John Deere tractors in the background, and he says John Deere are going to Mexico, we're going to stop that happening, tariffs, blah blah blah. And everyone's like, oh yeah, he was having a right pop at John Deere, and it was all linked back to him because he did a trade deal that made it so the replacement to NAFTA was this trade deal whereby they could go and set up in Mexico. They were attracted to set up in Mexico by that trade deal, right? And then there were tariffs. There was a tariff war. There was a trade war with China, which meant that steel imports for China made it more expensive for John Deere to make things in America. So what Trump did is made it more expensive for John Deere to make tractors in America, then presented a trade deal that attracted John Deere to go and set up manufacturing in Mexico so that they could get around the tariffs on Chinese imports coming through America, because they could do it through Mexico without the tariffs, and then make that stuff in Mexico and have a free trade deal back into the US through the free trade deal that Trump had sorted out. And then Trump slags off John Deere for doing that at this thing the other week. And John Deere, like, you know, people like myself are like, what are you doing, mate? Like, they're there because of what you did. This is absolutely incredible. So then he said, a tariff threat to so his idea of like 100, 200, 500, 2,000% tariffs on everything across the board. He said at this talk that yesterday John Deere declared that it's killing its plan to move some more production to Mexico. Except there was no declaration yesterday, says Daniel Dale, who's a fact checker for CNN, and John Deere says it isn't killing the plan. In other words, Trump is just lying again. And you can go and check that out and all the fact checks that went on from this talk. So here are all the fact checks that were done on basically everything Trump said. Absolutely incredible. So this whole talk was a bit of a disaster, although some people say it was an absolutely magnificent talk. I won't go into that. That's an interesting bit of debunking there, because I want to stay on the economic side of things. So before we get to the Economic Club of Chicago, we're going to go to another sort of Trump speech on... actually, no, we'll probably go to... The whole thing about the talk at the Economic Club of Chicago is that it was bonkers and he didn't really make a lot of sense. And clearly, to me at any rate, didn't know what he was talking about. And this is this theme that we keep seeing.
Over the seas, and it comes right over our land. And then they want us to have clean. I say, wait a minute, we're going to be clean, but it's all flying. Just remember that. Does that make sense? In other words, it's all coming through the currents, through the air. It all comes. They can name it. They can say exactly where it's going to be and when.
Now, I don't really know the context of this, but just the way he's trying to form a coherent case for whatever he's talking about, and the way he joins these sentences together is incredibly poor. He's not using what we used to call connectives. He's not using connectives that join one idea to connect one idea to another in sentences. Moreover, however, in that way, blah blah blah. He's almost interrupting himself as he's having a thought with the next thought, and just bumbles on. So that when you actually read out what he says, it makes no sense. Over the seas and over land, over our land, and then they want us to have clean. I said, wait, we're going to be clean, but it's all flying. Just remember that. Does that make sense? In other words, it's all coming through the currents, through the air. They can name it. Just one idea flits into his head and then another. So, it amazes me that people, well, it's projection, but they accuse Kamala Harris of having word salad, and this guy cannot string thoughts together in a coherent way. We'll come to that, actually. That's, I think, really interesting idea. We'll come to that later. We're going to go to Tommy Vitor here, that actually does a bit of that, reading out what he's saying.
Let's dig in on this a bit, because even before the musical interlude, Trump did some Q&A, and even those were weird. So Philip Bump at the Washington Post printed in full one of Trump's answers to a very straightforward audience question about bringing down grocery prices. I'm going to read the beginning of it. So it's such a great question in the sense that people don't think of grocery. It sounds like not much an important word when you talk about homes and everything else, right? But more people tell me about grocery bills, where the price of bacon, the price of lettuce, the price of tomatoes, they tell me. And we're going to do with a lot of things. Our farmers aren't being treated properly, and we had a deal with China, and it was a great deal. I never mentioned it because once COVID came, I said that was a bridge too far, because I had a great relationship with President Xi, and here's a fierce man, and he's a man that likes China, and I understand that. But we had a deal, and he was perfect on that deal. $50 billion he was going to buy. We were doing numbers like you wouldn't believe for the farmer. That goes on for another 800 words, Rebecca. They mentioned.
Right. So he's asked a question. That was what the beginning of it was, and it goes on for another 800 words. And that was incredibly dire. Syntactically and in terms of sense, grammatically, just in terms of coherence, it was terrible. It was an absolute word salad mess. That's who you want to vote for if you're a Trump supporter. And all that's really happening here is immigration is doing all the heavy lifting. Build a wall, deport the immigrants, job done, I'll forgive Trump everything else. Everything else doesn't matter. This guy could be bonkers, nuts, he could be a criminal, he could be liable for sexual assault. He could have falsified his tax records and broken laws and been found guilty on 34 counts and is a felon for that kind of stuff. Don't care. Build a wall, deport immigrants, job done. And I think that's really, really worrying when you are blinded by these already problematic promises, because what they don't understand is his plans would be to get immigrants who have settled down and are integrated in the country with jobs and families, and you're literally going knocking on doors, busting down doors, taking people, 15 million people. These aren't people that just come in the last week. These are people that come in the last 20 years plus. You're going to take 15 million people, hoik them out of their lives, and send them, put them in camps, and then send them back to I don't know where. And you think that's not going to have an economic impact? You think that's not going to have some kind of cultural impact? But people are like, yeah, I want that to happen. I want that to happen. He can say bonkers things over here as long as that happens. But it's that happens bit is also really problematic, because I don't think people properly understand what that is. Anyway, again, more Trump.
32 days, Mr. Congressman. 32, she goes, and the election will be in 32 days.
Let's just listen to him again and just wonder if he's drunk, is he tired, is he on some kind of drugs?
32 days, Mr. Congressman. 32, she goes, and the election will be in 32 days. 32 days. The teleprompter crashed. 32 days. She kept going. I would have loved to. It kicked back in. It's called a kickback. Like some people know a lot about a kickback. It's called a kickback. They know in this administration. But no, it's a kickback. It kicks back in. And it did 32 days, Mr. Congressman. 32, she's going.
And they're obviously taking a mickey out of Kamala Harris there. Right, we're now going to move on to this infamous now, or famous, or whatever you want to call it, this Economic Club of Chicago talk with Bloomberg News. And what's fascinating is people like myself who watch it and other analysts say, oh my God, this is one of the worst performances I've ever seen. I even texted Greg Terry, right, who's another YouTuber who I converse with, who's a deep Republican, but he's also anti-Trump. And I said, mate, you've got to see this latest thing. He's absolutely not making any sense. It's an absolute catastrophe. And then you have people like Sean Hannity evaluating it like this.
So in one of his greatest all-time moments on the campaign trail, former President Donald Trump absolutely schooled Bloomberg's editor-in-chief today during a live appearance at the Economic Club of Chicago. Despite things getting, well, a little heated at times, Trump, frankly, masterfully navigated the situation, laid out what was a clear vision for American prosperity. Let's take a look.
He doesn't lay out a clear vision. You can't just vaguely talk about tariffs and say they're going to do X, Y, and Z. And when the guy says, no, they're not going to do X, Y, and Z, and we've got some evidence, we've got experts say they won't do that, just like wave it away. Like, disagreeing with someone is not schooling them. Like, just saying, no, that's not true, and saying it forcefully is not schooling someone. And when you have a lot of your implants in the audience clapping, right? So you might think this is an economic audience, but actually it's very clear that there's a lot of Republican plants in there, whooping and hollering when Trump is arguing with Micklethwaite. You can maybe be forgiven for I don't think you can be forgiven for thinking he's been schooled, Micklethwaite, because he wasn't. Like, this was not what happened. You've got Tim Murtaugh here saying there is no universe in which Kamala Harris could handle this interview with Bloomberg News at the Economic Club of Chicago. None. And Donald Trump is owning it. Right, and you're thinking, are you watching the same thing as I'm watching? Like, really? You think he's owning it? We've got JD Vance. You got Charlie Kirk from Turning Point USA saying, this is legendary. Trump calls the Bloomberg News editor-in-chief, John Micklethwaite, fake news right to his face at the Economic Club of Chicago event. As if that is schooling someone, as if that is how you do an argument. You're fake news. Here's X, Y, and Z. Here's an argument against your position. You're fake news. And then Charlie Kirk saying, this is legendary. Trump's just said he's fake news to his face. Really? Is that what you're impressed by? And then I'm thinking, well, no wonder people come away thinking Trump did amazingly there. Because if they're impressed with someone calling someone else, like insulting them to their face, essentially, if that's what impresses you, then no wonder you think this guy's amazing, because that's basically all he does. JD Vance, his running mate, says the entire interview is incredible. President Trump walking into the Lion's Den and reminding the people, it's not the Lion's Den, it's the Economic Club of Chicago, where you've got someone actually challenging him on economic issues, asking him pertinent questions. It's not the Lion's Den. Going to the Lion's Den and reminding the people who've screwed up the country that they're not as smart as they think. Brett Meiselas from the Midas Touch Network says, so funny how anyone Trump bombs in an interview, they say he walked into the Lion's Den. Anytime Trump bombs in an interview, they say he walked into the Lion's Den. No, weirdos. He just couldn't handle very basic questions and spontaneously combusted on stage. That is the kind of conclusion I came away with from this. Right, so here's a bunch of different... before we get to a bunch of different clips... Actually, it's worth seeing an analysis from here. The Rolling Stone says Trump crumbles when pressed on economic policy in a tense interview. The former president attempted to weave his way through an interview with Bloomberg News, but couldn't escape his own policy black hole. And this is talking to the idea that, I'd get the archive version up, but this is the idea that he's got a policy black hole. He hasn't laid out exactly what his economic policy is. He doesn't have an 81-page document. He's just got talking about tariffs and cutting taxes for the rich. And that's it. So, let's go through some of the clips from this discussion.
Our steel, by having that, we saved it. We saved our steel. Now, what was left, because we've lost so much, but there are certain companies you have to have. There are certain things you have to have. Steel, you have to have. If you go to war, there's a possibility you go to war. I kept us out of war. I was the only president in 82 years that kept you out of a war, except I defeated ISIS, but I inherited that war.
So listen to the clapping and the whooping. So straight away this is not a room full of economists, right? This is a room full of surrogates and whatever.
No wars. And by the way, and I think it's very important, you can go, I call it the weave. You can call it, you have the weave as long as you end up in the right location at the end. But while we're talking about it, we have never been so close to World War III as we are right now. With what's going on in Ukraine and Russia and the Middle East.
Well, let's.
I had no wars.
So Micklethwaite here is that trying to bring him back to the actual freaking question and subject, and this is what Trump does. He says, "I'm doing the weave," and what he's doing is he's pivoting to either what he wants to talk about because he feels confident in doing so, or he's just naturally just allowing himself to ramble. But what he's not doing is actually answering the question. So if you're watching this, if you're someone like J.D. Vance or Charlie Kirk or Sean Hannity watching this and think this is a mastermind and this is someone schooling Micklethwaite, then you just don't have a clue.
In the whole world, think of it, and I talked them out of wars. I talked plenty of countries out of wars. I had the whole world, other than ISIS, which I inherited, and I knocked out ISIS in a matter of weeks. It was supposed to take 4 to 5 years. I did it in a matter of weeks. We actually have a great military. We don't know how to use it, but we have a great military.
With great respect, I was asking about tariffs. You've gone off.
So this is brilliant. Micklethwaite says, with great respect, this is freaking irrelevant, mate. You've gone off and talked about X, Y, and Z. You're supposed to be talking about tariffs, right? Not about destroying ISIS and doing this and doing that. Get on point, you Egypt.
Military. We don't know how to use it, but we have a great military.
With great respect, I was asking about tariffs. You've gone off about that. Seeing you brought up tariffs and foreign policy, many people would say the biggest problem with your tariffs is actually geopolitics. You, in your first term, you got some credit for effectively saying that there was a Cold War against China.
He said you got some credit. He doesn't know what he's going to say. You got some credit for what? Making 4 pieces of toast, and when you buttered it, you didn't get any butter on the plate. No, okay. Credit for what? And it's really interesting. Like I'd say to you guys, concentrate on the little things. We know Trump is a narcissistic megalomaniac, as far as I'm concerned. So all he ever does is sit there and says how wonderful he is. You just listen to that answer about tariffs, and that was him trying to say how wonderful he was in not starting wars and destroying ISIS and blah, blah, blah. His initial reaction, his knee-jerk, straight away, his reaction is, not I got a little bit of kudos, I got a lot.
This problem with your tariffs is actually geopolitics. You, in your first term, you got some credit for effectively saying that there was a Cold War against China. That's what America was in.
So he's talking about there was a Cold War against China, and that's what America was in. That's what you got a bit of credit for saying. And he's like, I got a lot of credit. I got not just a little. I got a lot of credit. I don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea what this conversation is. But you saying I only got a little bit of credit, I got a lot of credit.
You look at the last Cold War against the Soviet Union, America won it in part because it rallied allies to it. You're talking about slamming allies with 30%, 20% tariffs. Isn't this time you're going to end up trying to rally the West and you're dividing it instead? Isn't that the real problem with tariffs, even beyond all the problems due to the economy, where you keep on bringing up these individual examples, but the overall effect is going to be dramatic?
No.
And it's exactly right. And we've just talked about the EU thinking up a policy now to basically answer a massive Trump tariff regime on EU products.
The overall effect will
answer first about foreign policy.
Yeah, I'll do that.
How does it help you take on China?
It helps
turning all your allies against
tremendously, because China thinks we're a stupid country, a very stupid country. They can't believe that somebody finally got wise to them. Not one president, Bush.
So, and then the way he answers that quite nuanced question about China and the Cold War is to say how amazing he is again. And that's what he does. So, how can I answer this question by saying I'm amazing?
We're a stupid country, a very stupid country. They can't believe that somebody finally got wise to them. Not one president, Bush, Obama, Barack Hussein Obama, have you heard of him? Not one president, think of it.
He just can't help himself.
Not one president charged China anything.
So on and so forth. And in fact, we'll do some more so oning and so forthing. Right, so here he is belittling car workers, people working at car assembly plants.
United States, and they have a little bit, but you know what they really are? Assembly, like in South Carolina. But they build everything in Germany, and then they assemble it here. They get away with murder because they say, oh, yes, we're building cars. They don't build cars. they take them out of a box and they assemble them. We could have our child do it.
Can we come back?
But you're so United States, and they have.
Two things. First of all, listen to Micklethwaite. Can we come back to? So again, you're not answering a question. You are talking about something random. Can we come back to this? But also, Trump, and he's given so much slack for this. He's not pulled up on because I listened to an analysis on this saying that just people got used to him and they kind of all say, "Oh, that's Trump." But actually, he is genuinely insulting an awful lot of people an awful lot of the time. Here, like auto workers working in car assembly lines, he's like a child could do that. Right, if you are going to make some kind of nuanced criticism against car assembly versus like massive car manufacturing from scratch, then do that in a way that's not going to insult the workers. Say, I want those workers. Those guys are highly valued and skilled people. Surely we should be getting them to manufacture the cars from scratch in this country. Surely those people have had so much more pride if they made that. Instead, he's like, look at what they do, bloody idiots. A kid could do that. And that's like, it's stuff like that it blows my mind that people still think this guy is any good. He's an absolute douche, and he doesn't know how to communicate things, and he gets given all that slack because he just talks strong on these big ticket ideas like immigration.
No doubt about it. So I've been talking about for the last year about Detroit and how horribly it has been. You know, it's just horrible because we've been talking about Detroit's coming back for 40 years, and it's no doubt about it.
And it's not. That is what he's saying. So he's slagged. Remember, he'd just been in Detroit, and he had slagged off Detroit in Detroit. Right? He's now come to Chicago, and he's still slagging off Detroit. He's not like, oh, that's a bit of a mistake. I need to correct that. I need to course correct there. He's doubling down on saying, like, Detroit is in a swing state, in a battleground state. He needs to be getting them on side, not alienating them, rubbing them up the wrong way. It's incredible. As Adam Mockler says, this is easily the worst political campaign I've ever seen. Genuinely, who is allowing this? It kind of amazed at how it just keeps getting worse. And yet this is what Sean Hannity thinks is like a mastermind. Masterfully doing all this stuff. Really? And yeah, this one is not on the Bloomberg one. Let's go back to another Bloomberg one here.
There's tremendous waste.
Give me an example of something you will do that will get rid of government spending.
Well, let me give you an example. When I came into government, I was the first thing.
An example going forward.
Well,
not
no, but
what you did in the past.
this is going forward because it's the same thing. When I first sat down,
so it's like, can you do this for me? He answers it in a different way. No, I've asked you to do this for me. He says, yeah, no, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to say how good I was then. No, what are you going to do going forward? This guy doesn't have a clue what he's going to do going forward.
General came into my office and he said, sir, it's nice to meet you. Would you please sign this? I said, what is it? It's a contract for a new Air Force One, which is actually two planes, not one, two Boeing 747. And I said, how much is it? $5.7 billion. So it's a hell of an expensive plane, but there's reasons for that. And he said, nope, I'm not signing it. I said, who negotiated? Barack Hussein Obama. I said, I'm not signing it. Why? Because there's a lot of fat. He said, I'm not signing it. It's got to have a 3 on it. Anyway, long story short, some of you have heard this. I got it down to, because...
Damn right some of them have heard it, because they've been to all your rallies, because they're your cronies in the audience.
First week, they cut off $400 million. He said, I'll cut... I met with the head of Boeing. Wait, Dennis. I said, Dennis, you got to have a 3. 5.7 is too much. 5.7 billion. He said, the most I'll take off is $400 million. I said, well, that's not bad for one conversation. So he got it down. I said, nope, I'm not accepting. Then he took off 2 more. Then he took off. Anyway, 2 months went by, 3 months went by. I thought we blew the deal, and it was okay with me. I didn't care. But we should have a new Air Force One. When we see these planes from Saudi Arabia, from different countries, brand new, and ours is like 32 years old, and it's a very different plane. It's a much smaller plane, you know, the whole thing. The United States should have the best plane, I will tell you.
And while there is I kind of point to what he says there, it's just it's just like, right, what are you going to do going forward? Okay, when I was in power before, I knocked $400 million off the price of Air Force One when that was being sorted out. So I would take that kind of approach into, but then like that's not a policy. That's you. You aren't the one that's going to sit down and do all these government policies. So what are you going to do going forward to get rid of government spending that's too much? Like you can't just go give me an anecdote of how you saved a bit of money with with something that you did individually at one point in the past. What are you going to do going forward? Because you aren't going to be sitting down with all of these contractors and sorting out their contracts individually. It's just, yeah.
What about, can I ask you a particular thing about the dollar? You talked about wars. At the New York Economic Club, you said that if you lost the dollar as a reserve currency, it would be like America losing a war.
Yeah.
You look at what you're going to do in terms of protectionism, drive countries to use the other currencies. Yeah. And all that debt is also going to lessen the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency.
If
Don't you worry about
the
that?
dollar is so secure, your reserve currency is the strongest it'll ever be. And
what about,
So, and what he does there, and it cuts off there, unfortunately, but what he does there is he answers with these vague assertions that it's like, what are you going to do about this? And he's saying, look, here's a bad point, yeah. Here's a bad point, yeah. So Trump doesn't really understand that he's being done over by like this is going to happen. Yeah. So what are you going to do about reserve currency and this and that? It's like when I come in, the dollar's going to be amazing. It'll be the greatest thing you've ever seen. And it's like, yeah, that's not answering the question. So and it goes back to J.D. Vance and Charlie Kirk and Sean Hannity. What are you doing when you are watching this? Like, how are you interpreting this as Trump masterfully winning it's not about winning, it's about answering challenging questions about your economic plan. And you can't just say it's going to be the greatest currency the world's ever seen. That's not good enough.
Come back to the Europeans in a second. What about consumers? People out there.
They're going to be the biggest beneficiaries.
Again, what about consumers? And before anything, they're going to be the biggest beneficiaries. The consumers are going to be better than they've ever been. It'd be the greatest thing ever.
Say your tariffs will end up being like a national sales tax.
Nope. The countries will pay.
If you have America at the moment.
And there you have it. And there you have that Trump doesn't understand how tariffs will work. No one sat down and explained to him. No one's had the balls to sit down with Trump and say, by the way, I know you've been banging on about this for fucking ages, but we need to talk about tariffs because I don't think you understand them. Like, no one's done that. And so Trump goes to the Economic Club of Chicago, speaks to the editor-in-chief of Bloomberg, who says these are basically a sales tax. There's a really good article that explains this. Let's find it. So here's this article, it's a CNN article, 3 charts to explain how Trump's tariffs would work, right? So how tariffs work. To illustrate how tariffs affect American businesses and consumers, imagine this scenario involving a fictitious foreign shoe manufacturer called Worldwide Shoes. Foreign manufacturer produces goods to be sold in the US. Worldwide Shoes produces a variety of sneakers, dress shoes, and sandals outside of the US. The shoes are shipped into the US where they face a tariff. The US places a 20% tariff on each pair of shoes. Companies based in the US pay the tariff to the US Treasury. US Sneakers, an American company that purchases from Worldwide Shoes, pays for the total cost of the imported shoes plus the tariff. So a $100 pair of shoes now costs US Sneakers $120. So when Trump says the country's going to pay for the tariff, he doesn't freaking understand how tariffs work. Like, it is a tax that you are putting on the importers who are your own people and companies in the US. Now, as it says here, the US company has a few options to make up for this increased cost. So the tax it's not a tariff to stop, the Chinese company exporting stuff to the US. It's a cost incurred upon the importer and therefore passed on to the seller or whoever, right? And then therefore the consumer. how do these US entities kind of sort through this? So there are three options, says CNN. One, the company eats the cost of the tariff. US Sneakers decides to keep the price it charges for the shoes the same. The company is making a smaller profit and may have less money to pay its workers or invest in expansion, for example. In other words, the US government is taxing that company a little bit more, and they are eating the cost of the extra taxes. Two, the company passes along some of the cost of the tariff to the buyer. US Sneakers raises the price of the shoes by $10, covering half of the cost of the $20 tariff, and then eats the other $10. So it's a 50-50. Three, or anywhere in between, right? Three, the company passes along the total cost of the tariff to the buyer. US Sneakers raises the price of the shoes to $20 to make up for what it paid for the tariff. The American consumer, in those two cases, pays a higher price. And in the first case, the company pays a higher price, and as a result, shareholders don't get as much money, or there is an expansion. There's not enough money in the coffers for the company to do X, Y, and Z for their workers, with their workers, or to expand or whatever, right? So either the company pays that cost or the consumer. And if the company pays that cost in this number one example, then what they'll do is they'll put the prices up anyway, but if they do want to expand, which is essentially 2 and 3, right? So it's just that he doesn't understand the basics of tariffs is absolutely incredible. It's just insane that he would continue to think this. Anyway, I forget exactly where we were now, so I better go and find that video we were halfway through. Here it is. It's going to be this one, I presume. Anyway, I'll go and find it now. So here it is. Sorry, let's rewind then to just, now that we know how tariffs work, hopefully.
The Europeans in a second. What about consumers? People out there.
They're going to be the biggest beneficiaries.
Yeah, critics say your tariff.
The consumers are going to be the biggest beneficiaries. They're going to be paying more. It's just simply not true.
Tariffs will end up being like a national sales tax.
Nope. The countries will pay.
The countries will pay. Simply not true.
You have America at the moment has $3 trillion worth of imports. You're going to add tariffs to every single one of them. That is going to push up the cost for all those people who want to buy foreign goods. No.
The editor-in-chief knows what he's talking about. And Trump's response is no. No. Literally, that's how tariffs work. You can't just say no. By saying no, you just don't therefore know what tariffs are and do and how they work.
What's going to happen?
It's simple mathematics, President Trump.
It's not. It is, but not the way you figured. I was always very good at mathematics.
Come back to the European.
And that's what he does. He just disagrees. And that's why people looking at this with a more objective eye think this was an absolute disaster, because they know how tariffs work. Now, what this does, because you wonder how is it that 46.7% of people are still thinking, well, Trump is the guy I'm going to vote for. And it's because people like Sean Hannity are communicating to a vast proportion of the electorate that this was a mastermind. And so you don't have to go and watch this. You don't even need to understand how tariffs work, although you do. You really do need to understand. But you don't if you are this kind of viewer that is watching Fox News, being told that this was a masterful performance by Trump, and Trump obviously knows his economics because he's put this editor-in-chief in place, and job done. So I don't need to, as a Fox News viewer, I don't need to watch that. I know that Trump is amazing. Sean Hannity's told me amazing. He's amazing. I trust Sean Hannity. He's watched that and says it was a mastermind. So now I go away thinking, well, Trump's a mastermind at economics. But the reality is completely the opposite. But this is all about, therefore, information bubbles and the inoculation of a vast majority of the electorate who lives in the Fox News, Newsmax, OAN information spaces, and then the online ones that are similar, that are never, ever given a more objective appreciation of actually what's going on in these speeches.
No doubt about it.
So sorry, that's him going on slagging off Detroit again. yeah, so Micklethwaite, if you add up all the promises you've made, it would add to 7.5 trillion in debt. Tariffs, that's barely the cost of 2 promises. So this isn't the same as what we had heard, but this is still to do with tariffs and raising the money for his other policies.
You heard the reception there. The business people of Chicago, like everywhere else, they like a lot of the things you want to do in terms of tax cuts and some of the spending proposals. But like many business people, what they're often worried about is the cost. And the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, which is a bipartisan outfit, put out some predictions the other day. If you add up all the promises you've made, then your plans would add $7.5 trillion to the debt. That's more than twice the total for Vice President Harris. You're on course to push up debt up to 150% of GDP. You know, this is a very business-like audience. Why should they trust you with that?
Because we're about growth. She's got no growth whatsoever. And we're all about growth. We're going to bring companies back to our country. You look at even today, as I was driving over, I see these empty, old, beautiful, like steel mills and factories that are empty and falling down. Some have been converted to senior citizens' homes, but that's not going to do the trick. And we're going to bring the companies back. We're going to lower taxes still further for companies that are going to make their product in the U.S.
So what he's saying, and unfortunately the microphone cut out for the first part, but he's saying we're going to bring companies back. He doesn't say how he's going to do that. He's saying we're going to bring companies back. So how are you going to pay for 7.5 trillion being added to the debt? So you've already got the national debt. You're going to add to it. How are you going to pay for that? We're going to bring companies back.
Homes, but that's not going to do the trick. And we're going to bring the companies back. We're going to lower taxes.
And then we're going to lower taxes. So he's going to lower taxes even further. So the last time he lowered taxes, he added trillions to the debt. So the 2017 tax cuts did not do what he promised they would do. And they added to the national debt. And he's going to continue those. So he's going to extend those tax cuts that run out this next year. And then he's going to make further tax cuts. That's part of his agenda. And every economist is saying you're going to add to the debt. So his answer to how are you going to cut the debt down is to give an answer that suggests adding to the debt. It is literally like the worst answer you could give.
Still further for companies that are going to make their product in the USA. We're going to protect those companies with strong tariffs because I'm a believer in tariffs. I'm not sure that you are. I don't think you are, but I congratulate you on your career. But to me, the most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariff. And it's my favorite word. It needs a public relations firm.
There's a smattering of applause from the audience. They're the Trumpites, but the actual economics people in the audience are like, You know, if you're a free market economist, then tariffs are a form of regulation or a barrier to entry to a market. This is antithetical to free market economics. And so if you've got an audience full of economists or economically minded people, saying tariffs are the most beautiful word in the English language is not going to go down well. Which is why when he said to Micklethwaite, you're obviously not a fan of tariffs, and he said not especially, which would be kind of my view, which is they are very useful in particular situations, but across the board tariffs are going to be a bit of an issue.
But to me, it's the most beautiful word in the dictionary.
Tariffs, do you think that will bring in the revenues? To use another bipartisan group, Pearson Institute, they say they only bring in $200 billion. That is that's barely the cost of 2 of your promises.
Yeah, but that's like for what company are you talking about? Okay, look, I brought in with tariffs, and I was just getting started. Then COVID came, and we had because I tell you what, I did a very good job in COVID. Nobody knew what the hell it was. I call it the China virus because I like.
So again, he goes off on one, talks about COVID, but he's trying to say, look, I started putting tariffs on and then, they weren't able to succeed because, COVID, blah, blah, blah. But just, I don't know.
President, think of it. Not one president charged China anything. They said, they are a third world nation. They are developing. Well, we're a developing nation, too. Take a look at Detroit. President.
So again, another slam at Detroit there. Is this the sort of answers you should be giving? And he's just like, going off the economics thing and onto just kind of nonsense word salad, the idea that he's made up the word caravan.
And I said, no, there isn't. You sent them over in a caravan. The caravan. I made up that name too. I'm good at names. You know the names? I can't use those names too much because many of them were for Republicans. And I said, no.
Just, oh, good God. And then here's a question about small businesses. So what do we have? Watch Donald Trump attempt to answer the question about helping small businesses. It's wild. Putting this man in charge of our nation is a worse idea than it was in 2016. Okay, so answer about small businesses.
My question is, what's your plan to help bring common sense back and help small businesses?
So, great. The fact is that, they want to get away from gas. And I have friends, they're into the cooking world. I'm not. I just like to eat. But they're into the cooking. And I don't know how you feel. It sounds like they feel that gas is much better than the electric for cooking, right? And they have this thing about, they want to put gas out of business, right? No gas. The amazing thing? We don't have electric in this country, but we have all the gas you can use. We have oil and gas. That's what we have. And even the cars, if you look, they want to go with all electric cars. California is having blackouts.
Question is, what are you going to do for small businesses?
Every week, brownouts, blackouts, and then they come up with rules and regulation to go to all electric, but they can't even supply what they have. It's so nuts. We're going to get, number one, your utility costs. You heard me say it before. Your costs will be down, and we're getting rid of all the electric. If you want electric, great. And if you want gas, great. The only thing you can't have is a hydrogen car, right? You heard me say that, right? Because you know what happens? They have a new car, they say it's great, but it's got one problem. You know what the problem is? Every once in a while, one will blow up. And if it does blow up and you happen to be inside of it, you're in bad luck because you're not recognizable. Do you know that? It's the new thing, hydrogen. I said, no, thank you. I don't want it. I don't want. They called the wife. That's not my husband. Oh, yes, it is. It's no good.
What are you going to do to help small businesses? And he'll probably call that the weave there, that what he's done. And it's just like absolute word salad nonsense. Trump claims that he achieved the lowest African-American unemployment rate ever recorded. Fact check, this is a total lie. Biden-Harris presided over the lowest black unemployment rate ever recorded, not Trump. And Trump presided over the record high black unemployment. Of course, that's going to be...
But we achieved the lowest African-American unemployment rate and the lowest African-American poverty rate ever recorded during my 4 years.
And it's just frustrating when that gets a round of applause. It's like, you're lying, it gets a round of applause. And then finally, I'm going to leave you with this. This is a cult expert. By the way, I'm going to speak to a cult expert. I've spoken to him a couple of times before on my other channel. When I used to write articles on Scientology, actually, I used him as my source for quotes. He worked in the inner sanctum, basically, of Scientology, Chris Shelton. So he's going to talk to me us about cults, and actually he's going to talk about cults in terms of Donald Trump and whether he is actually something of a cult leader in some way, which I think is a really interesting concept. Now, remember the other day when he did that town hall? So it's supposed to be a Q&A session. So the audience get to ask Trump stuff and he gives them answers that give the audience a sense of what he's going to do as president of the USA. A couple of people fainted and that got all sorted out. But then he was like, oh, we'll do music. You guys don't want to listen to me talk. And he kind of attached it to the fact that people fainted, but it wasn't really. And then he had 39 minutes of listening to music and swaying. And it was the weirdest thing. And then at the end, Kristi Noem, who was like really uncomfortable and didn't quite know what to do there, she said, oh, have we got time for any more questions? He said, yeah, we've got time for one more question. Okay, we've got time for one more question. And then he went, oh no, let's just have some more music and then put on another song. So you've got someone that's just like not wanting to answer questions. This wasn't because people fainted. This was someone putting on music for 39 minutes and having a weird out session. So Matthew Remski, who's a cult expert, says Trump surrendering tonight's Q&A to 30 minutes of his favourite songs while standing on stage, awkwardly conducting at times, echoes many instances of cultic leaders who, exhausted, ill, and at the end of their cognitive rope, outsource their emotional dominance subroutines to canned music they personally find exquisitely sentimental. So if you listen to that, he's like, Ave Maria, I want the one with music, with words, and as traumatized narcissists, they are seeking comfort and avoiding work, but also assume that their core memories of pleasure will make their power and soul transparent and accessible to their followers. Yes, it's weird. No, the campaign gives no explanation because the logic is a sealed system. Believers lose themselves in the choruses. Handlers know there's nothing they can do but help keep him propped up. Kristi Noem knows her inner circle status depends on staying bright-eyed. The leader of the group I was in for 3 years maintained a Trump campaign-like schedule of daily 2-hour sermons. Over the years, he increasingly relied on his DJ to fill the room with emotional overwhelm whenever he gapped out. He was 78 too. He air-conditioned the tunes. He had a shrinking repertoire of melted talking points, but because there was never any substance to his shtick, he didn't struggle to remember details that were slipping away. He just turned to the music. All he had ever done was generated a mood. Then he died of a stroke. May be helpful to keep in mind for Trump followers, the default to pure emotionality can be effective right up until the end. For some, the intensity of their bond might increase because for them, as for him, the effect was the point. They weren't there for the platform. There are many people in the crowd who are uncomfortable or who can recognize the signs or who get bored and leave early. But for those really caught up, that 30 minutes of music and reverie might feel like the most direct and intimate contact they've ever had with him. Really interesting, because then when you go back to this, I mean, many of the things I've been talking about, that he doesn't really know what he's talking about in terms of the detail that is needed when he's questioned on X, Y, and Z. So rather than deal with actual questions on policy, he'll just go back to some kind of safe space of music, and that allows him and some of those audience members to connect with him and allows him to just be in a safe space and zone out. And that is a reflection of who he is and where he's at the moment. Really fascinating stuff. Anyway, let me know what you think there. I was blown away by the Chicago, the Economic Club of Chicago there, and how it was an absolute shocker of a discussion, and that Sean Hannity presents that in almost a gaslighting kind of way. And the importance here is how that lands with the core audience of, say, Fox News. Because the reality at the moment of what's going on is that Fox News viewers or Trump supporters are not, they're not hearing Kamala Harris, which is why she went on Fox News. They are not hearing her sound cogent and strong and heartfelt and empathic and emotional, but also detailed and giving substance on policy, right? So they're not hearing that, and they're not hearing Trump make an absolute fool of himself, or they're not hearing why, for example, at that talk, Trump was not answering the questions, didn't understand what tariffs were, because Sean Hannity is not telling them that. No one on Fox News is telling them how safe a pair of hands Kamala Harris is sounding like she's going to be. And they're not telling them the truth of Donald Trump. And they're selling Donald Trump as this masterful guy who's just destroyed the editor-in-chief of Bloomberg. And that's not the reality. So you have this really large amount of the electorate where I keep questioning, how do 46% of the electorate, how are they still going to vote for Trump? It's because they don't know any other way. They don't know what the alternative is, truly. They don't really know what Harris is about. They've not watched her. They've watched her through the lens of Fox News, and they've watched Trump through the lens of Fox News, and they're not getting the kind of analysis that hopefully I'm giving here, which is he clearly doesn't understand tariffs. These are what tariffs do. This is what he's proposing. This will be inflationary. If you're an American, all of your, like most of your goods are going to go up because, you know, things take things that are even made in the US are going to be used in parts that are imported from abroad. Everything will go up in price. You don't know that because Fox News is not doing their due diligence, and they are not telling you this. And they are failing their audience. And as a result, their audience is going to vote for Trump under a set of false pretenses. Let me know what you think, guys. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.